Let me talk to you a little bit about the Eurogroup. Now, you have to remember that your own country is embedded in a monetary union, in the euro area, which is perhaps the most significant economy in the world. And it is the economy in the world which is refusing to recover after the 2008 financial crisis and dragging down the global world order. That is, the United States recovered much more readily after 2009. China has been struggling against all odds to maintain its growth level above 6% in order to stabilize itself, and to a very large extent to save Germany. Because after the collapse of the European periphery, German exports were propped up by the bubbles that the Chinese created on purpose to stabilize the world order. So we are the sick economy of the world, the Eurozone, while at the same time being perhaps the most important one. Now, the Eurozone, think of it as our confederacy, a confederal macroeconomy, political economy, the United States of Europe that once upon a time was being imagined. This is what we have instead of the United States of Europe. But it is a single bloc, economic bloc with a single currency. Now, who runs it? It's not Mrs. Merkel. It's not Wolfgang Schäuble. It's not the finance ministers who sit around the table of the Eurogroup. The Eurogroup makes all the important decisions that affect your lives, all of them, every single one of them. State governments, the federal government here makes some decisions, but the main ones that affect your daily existence come from the Eurogroup. Now, what is the Eurogroup? When I asked at some point, sometime in June, what is the, it wasn't exactly that which I asked. President Dijsselbloem had made a decision, I won't bother you with what it was, which I contested. So I asked for legal advice from the Secretariat of the Eurogroup. And I said, President Dijsselbloem just decided to do X. Does he have the right, according to the rules, to do X? Suddenly there was panic. For 10 minutes, officials were talking to one another, they were picking up the phone, talking to unseen and unheard, by me at least, officials. 10 minutes, that 10 minutes is a long time. And then some bureaucrat addresses me and says, Minister, the Eurogroup does not exist in law since it is not part of any of the European Union treaties, which means that there are no rules and therefore its president can do as he likes. Now that is the body which is running our economy, our collective Eurozonal economy. Now, if you look at it, imagine you are a fly on the wall and you're looking at the Eurogroup now. What you see is a very large table, okay? It's a rectangular table. The two longer sides is where the finance ministers sit. I would sit opposite Schäuble. Schäuble would be diagonally opposed to me. Next to me would be Luis de Guindos, the Spanish finance minister. On my left side would be Michael Noonan, the Irish finance minister. The finance ministers were sitting along the long lines of the table. The short sides of the table were where the power resided. It was Dijsselbloem, not that powerful, but the president. Next to him was a man called Thomas Wieser. Have you heard of him? Probably not. He's the deputy of Dijsselbloem. He heads the Euro Working Group, which is the bureaucrats, you know, the cabinet of the Eurogroup. Much more powerful than any of the ministers there. Never heard of him. You've never voted for him. You can't. He's unelected. On the opposite side of the table is Mario Draghi, the head of the ECB. A very smart man. Next to him, another smart man, a very pleasant person too, Benoît Cœuré, unelected. They are representing the central bank. Opposite them, again, going back to the side of Dijsselbloem, is a guy called Paul Thompson, who is the head of the European desk of the International Monetary Fund. Sometimes Christine Lagarde is there with him when she's in town. When she's not, she's represented by him. So the International Monetary Fund has a seat, a very important seat, in your government, the Eurogroup, our government. That's what our government really is, where the big decisions are made. Going back again to the other side of the table where Draghi is sitting, next to him is the least significant member of the Troika, the Economics and Finance Commissioner, Pierre Moscovici. Not because he's not a substantial person, but because the Commission these days has next to no power. Their views, whenever they try to help us, this was bad news for us. They damaged us by trying to help us. You can imagine what I'm talking about. The finance ministers, let me give you a piece of information here. By the way, before I give you that piece of information, the choreography now. We're in a theater, let me tell you the choreography. Let's say we're talking about Greece, for example. President Dijsselbloem will say, okay, now we're going to talk about Greece and we're going to assess the progress of the Greek program. First would be Moscovici representing the Commission. For historical reasons, he speaks first, blah, 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 blah. Then Mario Draghi speaks on behalf of the ECB, giving his assessment of how the Greek program is going, if it's Spain, how the Spanish national budget's execution is progressing, if it's Italy, and so on and so forth, France. Then there will be the International Monetary Fund representative speaking. Again, remember, this is an IMF person speaking about European affairs. And then the minister of the country which is being discussed will have 10 minutes or so to wrap up, to say a few things. Now, the ministers who are sitting there have precisely zero information in front of them about what is being discussed. No folder, no statistics, no data, nothing, zero. It's whatever the Troika representatives tell them. Then each one of them takes the floor and says a few things on the basis of complete and utter, by design, ignorance. They have no data. At some point, the Irish finance minister, when the Greek negotiation was hotting up and I was being presented in that meeting with an ultimatum by Mr. Dijsselbloem, Michael Noonan put his hand up. I wrote an article about that in the Irish Times. He said, I'm being asked to participate in a conversation where I have absolutely no information about what's going on. I don't know what the Greek proposals are. I don't know what the Troika proposals are about Greece. How am I supposed to have an opinion about this? I'm telling you all this so that you can get a feel. I'm answering your question. So the Eurogroup, which makes all the decisions on our behalf, is really not guided by the finance ministers. The finance ministers are there to lend legitimacy to it on the basis of being totally ignorant. Maybe Wolfgang is not ignorant because he has privileged information. But I can assure you I was, except for issues concerning Greece, because, of course, that was my expertise. But when we were discussing France, I had no information, except some things that you could read in Die Zeit or in Financial Times. Yeah? So you had as much information as I did. So who makes the decisions? These are all pre-packaged decisions. Decisions that have already been decided behind closed doors by the Troika. And the Eurogroup is simply a process. Do you know the only thing of substance that the Eurogroup does? We decide the communique. You know, the press release. The wording of it. We can be there for 6 hours arguing about 2 words. On one occasion, we're there for 7 hours arguing about 1 word. Okay? Now, compare and contrast this to the United States. The United States' quality of democracy leaves much to be desired, as we all know. But at least there is a Senate, there is a House of Representatives, where, as the Americans say, the buck stops. Even the president can be impeached by the Senate. The Treasury Secretary has to go to the Senate and answer to them as to what decisions he's made. The Fed, Janet Yellen now, Ben Bernanke before, has to appear regularly in front of the Senate, and the Senate can censure the Fed. The Eurogroup is not even determined in terms of this decision-making by its own members. They go back to their countries. I can tell you from experience, in the dark about what is the essence of what has been decided. They are not answerable. We as finance ministers would go back to our parliaments and we would say, well, I did my best. Yeah? I was not answerable to Parliament. How could Parliament censure me on a decision which I really never made when we were talking about France or Spain or whatever? So we have created a common currency that is, together with the dollar, the most significant currency in the world, outside the political process. And because money can never be apolitical, when you take money outside the political process, you make it, firstly, inefficient economically. Secondly, it gives rise to crisis and then to failures in dealing with the crisis. And because of these failures, this system, in order to reproduce itself, has to turn to authoritarianism to do so, and to squeeze governments like us that have the audacity to say no.